Now, while many say that Donald Trump is having a bad week with his simply spur of the moment remarks, our next guest says there might be more intention behind those comments than it appears. Paul Kellogg is an associate professor at the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies at Athabasca University. Thanks for joining us, Paul. You know, we've been hearing Trump now for months, and controversial is one way to call his remarks. Comments on, as we heard, just abortion, foreign policy, but also on race. Are these off-the-cuff remarks, or are these part of a bigger plan?
They're absolutely part of a bigger plan. Donald Trump's opening, you go back 9 months to when he launched his presidential campaign, it was one of the more outrageous speeches in U.S. political history, talking about building a fence, talking about expelling people from the country. That wasn't off the cuff. That was how he began his campaign. It was calculated. He is consciously trying to tap into a deeply racist section of the U.S. electorate to mobilize them to try to win the Republican nomination. And we've seen this kind of thing before in American politics, and we have to take it quite seriously.
Well, let's break that up. First,
Sure.
I want to go back to this idea that he's doing this in a calculated fashion. If that is the case, do you think he really believes these comments that he's making about, say, Mexicans, Latinos, Muslims? Does he really believe what he's saying?
What an interesting question. At one level, my response is I have no idea, because I have a hard time getting an insight into the mind of someone as odd as Donald Trump. However, in terms of, let's take one issue of racism and violence, the ease with which he has incited violence at his rallies, when there are openly racist incidents, when the African-American protester, for instance, was punched and he encouraged it and said he would pay the person's legal bills, that kind of a response that comes with such ease indicates someone who actually is comfortable putting on a racist overcoat. And the issue for me is, and I think for us, is not so much what's in his head, but what he is doing. And what he is doing is giving legitimacy to some of the most violent, ugly, racist, and now we see sexist sentiments inside U.S. society, with a calculation that he can use this to build a base to capture the Republican Party.
Well, let's talk about that too, because, you know, race baiting has happened before in elections in Western countries. It's happened before in Canada. It's happened in the United States. What is the danger of resurrecting race baiting as part of the American political discourse at this time?
Well, there's two parts to that. One is, it is race baiting. We've seen it before. But the second part is it's race baiting with an open encouragement of violence associated with it. And that combination, particularly when that violence is associated with mass rallies. He said rallies of 35, 20,000, 15,000, 10,000. That kind of a mixture is dangerous. I want to think about another thing we have to ask ourselves, though, is why does this work? I think that's more troubling than Trump himself. I think that we have underestimated the extent to which the Republican Party itself has been an incubator for racism for a very, very long time. It's sort of been built in the modern era out of white flight from the Democratic Party, first with the Strom Thurmond era in 1948, then George Wallace breaking from the Democratic Party, his base then ending up in the Republican Party. And the Tea Party phenomenon of 2009 is the immediate predecessor to Donald Trump. And its formation has to be seen as a backlash against the presidency of President Barack Obama. It forms in February 2009, right after his inauguration.
And of course, he being part of the birther movement, questioning whether or not Obama was even born in the United States.
That was a very interesting, awful, and calculated move that Trump played in 2011, where he was testing the water to see how this kind of an unbelievably ignorant and racist discourse how far it could go in terms of building a base. And it actually went quite far.
And before I let you go, because we're running out of time here, though, and as we said in the whole setup to this conversation, it has been a bad week for Donald Trump. He's now having to apologize for comments he's made this week about, as we said, abortion and foreign policy. Are these controversial, inflammatory remarks now backfiring on Donald Trump?
Yes. And that means he is likely, there is a strong possibility that he will not be able to win. I mean, he might win the Republican presidential nomination, so this might stop him. He might have a hiccup on the political road. That doesn't mean we don't need to worry about him. Even if Donald Trump does not become the Republican presidential nominee, his social impact, in my opinion, is more worrying. He's talking now, last week he's raised the prospect of a third-party run organized on the basis that he has articulated in the last several months, is something that we're going to have to take very seriously as a social phenomenon in the United States and in Canada, because the kind of racism that he's tapping is obviously deep inside sections of the U.S. population, but we're not immune from it here in Canada as well. And it's going to be one of the key political issues that we are going to have to confront in the United States, certainly, but also in Canada in the coming years.
Paul, I want to thank you. We could go on, but we've run out of time. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you for having me on your show. Thanks very much.
And that is Paul Kellogg, an associate professor at the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies at Athabasca University.